Hey everyone, I wanted to welcome you to another episode of Gay Grit, and I have the great pleasure of having Matt Liberatore with me today, who is an EMDR. I got that right, the initials right. I always want to see ADM, and I know that's not
One
that.
does. Yep, yep.
We're not dancing here.
Most
Um,
of my gay clients want to do it.
uh, Therapist here in the Chicago area. And Matt, why don't you just tell us a little bit about you, your background, anything that you want to start off with?
Yeah. So, um, I have a very typical, uh, raised in the Chicago suburbs, growing up, born and raised. I've been in Chicago this whole time. There was like one stint where I went to Florida and then I came back. Um, but my background is, I mean, if I just tell you a little bit about my professional background, my bachelor's is in clarinet performance, orchestrally trained. So this was not at all where I would imagine that I would end up. If you'd asked my, 18 or 19-year-old self, he would have said he was going to be playing in a symphony somewhere. Uh, but, as I believe, all different things that happen in life happen to us and then through us. And so that kind of led me to different paths and different opportunities. And coming back from Florida, I came back to run my parents' company. And then about 2 years into that, I realized that I couldn't do that for the rest of my life, that I had to have a bigger purpose. And so I went back for graduate school, and that's where I got my clinical mental health and my school counseling degree. And then, yeah, I mean, there's a long and a short story, but I'll tell you the abbreviated long story is, I went into school counseling, and then because I had a business background,
Mm.
um, I just kept on getting tapped for leadership positions and then ended up doing, administration and an assistant principal of student services and then a district director of student services. And that just means I was over like 90 psych social workers and counselors and programming for mental health within the school district.
Hmm.
Uh, but in that process, I realized I got further and further away from doing the one-on-one work. And then that caused me to open up a private practice. And then kind of organically, just that opportunity opened itself up for me to transition away from education into running the practice full time.
It's so funny when you're telling me that. I forgot that part of your history because now that you shared it with me, I'm like, oh yeah, I remember that part in your life. So that's pretty cool.
Well, it feels like when people talk to me about my education career, because I was in education for 11 years,
Yes,
feels like it was another life or another lifetime ago or something like that. So,
I bet. I bet. And I know you had uh there's something that segued into this particular type of therapy. And could you tell us a little bit about that and how I know you worked on yourself, and that's kind of how I think you said that's how you got introduced to it.
yeah. And well, so it's interesting. So my current role is I run the practice. It's a small private practice in Lakeview, um,
Which is in Chicago.
is in Chicago. That's correct. That's correct. And uh, we had just hired 2 employees, so I think we'll be at like 5 therapists and then
Mhm.
6, including myself. Um, and then I'm an adjunct professor at DePaul University teaching trauma and crisis. And so I just share that from the perspective of, you know, where the passion came from and how I got into it is I have to rewind and go back to, becoming a therapist and really wanting to help clients and do my due diligence. And I got into it because of my own therapy. That's what actually inspired me to be a therapist was I did about 18 years of my own individual talk therapy with different therapists throughout Chicago. And so I found it so beneficial to be able to have that space to be as a sounding board and help me explore myself. And so I found it through therapy. Therapy I found through being in the city of Chicago and my HIV diagnosis actually led me to group therapy at
Mm.
Center on Halsted in Chicago. And so when I did group therapy there, that's when the group therapist said to me, he goes, I think you should go be a therapist. And I was like, I literally was like, I can't be a therapist. Like I have a clarinet bachelor's degree, and then basically he's like, no, if you have a bachelor's, you can get a master's in anything. And that caused me to have to like really self-reflect. And then that's actually what
Wow.
the catalyst for me going back and becoming a therapist. Um, as far as specifically the EMDR experience is, I did tons of therapy. Uh, I mean, if I could get a doctorate in like understanding myself prefrontal cortex and like really like knowing like why this was this way or that way, I would have received one from
Mm,
my talk therapy. But there were like still things that were happening. Um, that I'd hold a lot of shame and judgment for. And that's
mhm,
anything from I'm an active member of recovery, or things in relationships that were showing up as far as like a temper or just kind of like triggers that were going on. And is what
mhm.
I got to this point in talk therapy where it was like I could like learn everything I wanted about the trigger, but it wouldn't actually make a difference if I was triggered.
Yes.
Does that make
Yes.
sense?
It totally does.
And then
Yeah.
here I am, like a student of therapy, uh,
Hmm.
you know, being triggered, and then looking back and being like, oh, like what did we not do right? Like, oh, I got to go talk
Hmm.
about this. We've got to like have a conversation about this. I got to figure out why am I here again? You know what I mean?
Right. Right. Ah,
Uh,
I can relate to
yeah,
that.
yeah. And then I'm like my internal voice is like holding, you know, judgment and shame because why am I not getting this? Why
Right.
am I not getting this? And so uh, it was in a couples therapy session. I don't know the year it was, but I was in a couples therapy session. And that couples therapist said to me one time, have you ever heard of EMDR? Eye movement desensitization reprocessing.
Mm,
And obviously, being a therapist, I knew of EMDR, and um, the way I knew it, and I use this actually in my lectures to my students, is when you take theories in counseling graduate program, there's a book called the Corey book. And in that Corey book, they show all the modalities, and there's like a paragraph for every modality, right? That's all they show you is a paragraph for every modality. And I remember reading about EMDR when I was in graduate school in 2008, and I remember hearing like eye movement and a light bar. And as a like a aspiring therapist, I was like, there's no way that I'm doing that type of therapy. Like that sounds hokey. That's how all my own like prejudgments and stuff like that came up, because I was like, no, I'm going to be human center, and this is all about talking and communication and connecting. And I hear about this light bar, and I was like, no way, I'm not doing that. So that therapist said
Like,
EMDR.
who was it? This ain't no disco. This is LA.
Exactly.
Chicago, actually.
But it was like, so when he told it to me, immediately, those memories of that paragraph popped in my head. And I was like, she's like, no, I need you to know that I did EMDR, and it was pretty transformative around some things that I think you might benefit and get some help with. And so
Mhm.
that led to my referral to my EMDR therapist. Um, and that's kind of how I found it.
Wow. So there's so many things I want to unpack from this because it's fascinating, and I think probably why don't we talk? So we talked about a little bit of the technical aspect, but
Yeah. Yeah.
can you take us back through? Okay, so say there's why don't we go back to talking maybe about the types of trauma that may create things, I guess, in the brain
Yeah.
that cause this to not really be able to be resolved outside of, sorry, cannot be resolved perhaps in talk therapy, but like it would take something, another type of intervention to
Exactly.
make that kind of like heal or resolve itself or whatever. Maybe can you
That's right.
talk a little bit about the types of trauma that may
Yeah.
perhaps lead that to
Yeah.
happen?
So I first like to start out when I teach on this topic at the university is I like to say like I like to take the word trauma and throw it out. Because most people, right, when they hear trauma, usually we're self-selecting out of that. Oh, I've never had any, or maybe mine wasn't as big as someone else's, or that was no big deal. Well, right there, when I start hearing that language, that was no big deal. That's already shown me the protective layer that the system and the person is already created around the highly emotive experience. So what I like to call it is we don't have traumas. We have highly emotive experiences, and every single person has been through a highly emotive experience. Okay. And all a highly emotive experience is one of those experiences that turned on the nervous system. Okay. Oh, isn't that lovely?
The Zoom. Wait, let me try it.
I,
Work.
I couldn't have planned that any better, right?
There's a nervous system.
It turned on the nervous system. And that's exactly what happened. So just really basic for your listeners or your viewers is, the nervous system, just in simplistic terms, is you have your parasympathetic nervous system and you have your sympathetic nervous system. The parasympathetic nervous system is like what you and I are right now. We might be a little edged up a little bit because we're recording a call, but the reality of it is we're pretty calm, cool, collected. We're in our houses, the heat's on, we're in our chill zone, right? The sympathetic nervous system is our flight or fight zone. Okay. And sympathetic. That's right. That's right. They always confuse this because sympathetic sounds really nice and soft, right? But I always know it's the opposite. The sympathetic is the flight or fight response. Okay.
Okay.
And usually the way I start trying to find a highly emotive experience when I work with a client is they're like, tell me those postcard memories. Tell me those freeze frame memories that you have from childhood. Everyone has them, right? I always like to use little Matt, who's being picked for the sports teams, right? And there's like 25 students in the class. And as it starts dwindling down and we're like to the last 4 and I'm sitting over there, I'm starting to get sweaty. My heart rate's starting to beat, right? Like my sympathetic nervous system is turning on in that moment because it's detecting a threat. Okay.
Yeah.
And since developmentally, elementary and adolescence are designed to try and belong or be a part of, because my system is detecting a situation or an environmental threat I'm not going to be a part of, right? It's starting to turn on my nervous system. And what happens is what a lot of people don't understand is when that sympathetic nervous system turns on, it turns on like a video camera in your brain, right? And that's why you've got a postcard memory, okay?
Okay.
You remember the linoleum floor, you remember the brick on the wall, you remember the people who were sitting there, because the sympathetic nervous system is designed to record everything so that it recognizes a threat faster and quicker and triggers in the future. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And I could just see how this can really wreak havoc on somebody's, especially in a community where everyone, I can't say everyone, but like there's a high degree of struggles that we've all kind of come out of, just by virtue of being gay, so.
Exactly. And what happens is a lot of people don't understand is not only do I remember all the details of that memory, what it looked like on the floor and what it looked like that, but I also memorize the negative belief system that goes with that memory. And so in that situation, let's just say the negative belief system was like, I'm different, I don't belong, right? So now what happens is there's a little belief system trigger on my nervous system that now 47-year-old Matt, people are in a big group and pairing off and having to pick partners and stuff like that, at some convention or something like that. If I'm like towards the back or I'm towards the end and I start to trigger that message, I'm different, I don't belong, I can immediately go into flight or fight. I don't even know why. And it's actually connected to that elementary or that adolescent memory.
I had to tell you something. This reminds me, I just had this conversation a couple of weeks ago. And this happened probably, it was here in the neighborhood, and I had gotten invited to a birthday party. It was at a restaurant here in the neighborhood, and I got there, and it was like in the fall, so it was still relatively nice out, and it wasn't, you can kind of come wear whatever. And I entered into the room in the back area, and there were all these guys, and it was like packed in there. And I was so intimidated. I felt so uncomfortable. And I had brought a gift, and I couldn't find anybody to talk to. Every conversation I felt I tried to enter into, people walked away, even though I knew that wasn't, looking back on it, I know that wasn't happening. Either they were ending that conversation already, but there was this interpretation that I had in my head. It was like, they're looking at me a certain way. They can tell I'm a certain way. I don't really belong here. And I literally ducked out of that party. And I think there was probably, it was a lot of men were there, and I think it was probably maybe 50, 60 people. It was quite a few people. And I
Yeah.
knew some of them, but I knew a lot I didn't know. The more I knew only a handful of people. Most of the people I did not know, but I felt like when I walked in there, everyone was staring at me. And it brought this like feeling of like really severely uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And I got out of there. And it's so funny. I think that probably happened maybe like 6 or 7 years ago. And
Mhm.
so the person I was like connecting with recently, he says, "Oh yeah, I remember you got me this journal for my party, and I remember you left that day and we were having a hard time." And I said, "Oh yeah." I think I probably would have handled it a little bit better now, but then I was like, threat. I got to get out of here. I felt shame. I felt all this weird feelings.
That's right. That's right. How
Yeah,
old
and
how old does that feel to you?
that felt like junior high. That
That's right.
felt like it felt like seventh grade. It was like everyone just kind of, all the boys looking at you, pointing at you, looking at you, because they were all men, and they're all adult men that I was coming in there, and I just felt like I just didn't belong there. Yeah.
And so what I just did with you right there when I said how old does that feel like is I did a little float back technique. Okay. And I hope it's okay that I did that.
All
Uh,
good.
I should have asked your consent, but the reality of it is I'll use that as a springboard for float back techniques because
Mhm.
usually, you had a feeling, right? But I usually say, how old does that feel? Because then it brings you back to maybe potentially what it could be connected to. And
Mhm.
so that's
Yeah.
where we explore seventh grade, what happened around that time, right? Because those belief systems and those triggers are hardwired. And this is kind of going back to your original question about like, you know, tell me why this is different than talk therapy. Well, the thing is that stuff that got memorized and programmed from that seventh grade experience get programmed in your limbic system. That's your midbrain. Okay. That's your sense and belonging part of your brain, right?
The midbrain.
The midbrain. Yep. The limbic system. And so what happens is it's like, am I loved? It's kind of the part of you that makes meaning out of you with the rest of the world. And it's in the
Yeah.
midbrain. And the challenge with that is when you go into just standard talk therapy and you're just doing standard talk therapy interventions, you're using your prefrontal cortex for that. Okay. The front brain. And you're theorizing, you're rationalizing, you're analyzing, right? That's exactly what this brain is for, right? And you can understand everything about that experience, right? You can understand every single thing you want about that seventh grade experience and how it connected and all that stuff. But it still doesn't mean that the trigger won't be there because the trigger is actually located in the midbrain and you can't access that with your prefrontal cortex. And so
Mm.
there's only 7 modalities. Please do not ask me to name them all. Two that I practice are internal family systems and eye movement desensitization. And I teach the course, and there's another 5. I can send you the list. Um,
Yeah.
but those are the type of therapies that allow access to the midbrain. Because like you said, in that situation, right? Like let's just say, and I'll just use my example with the being picked for the school teams, sports teams. If my coping mechanism in that moment, right, when I felt that threat was to shut down
Mm-hmm.
or to leave, right? or to just kind of disassociate and numb my experience, then typically what's going to happen in the future when that message is triggered, I'm going to default to the same coping mechanisms without a choice because it's an autonomic system. It's a protective system that automates itself based on protection.
So I am reminded, and I'm remembering all these things. I read this book. My therapist had me read this book. I forgot, Siegel, I think, I forgot.
Yep, Dan Siegel. Yep.
Yeah, he had the neurobiology of we. So I read that, and when I was, and I really I took a lot of notes, and I was really into it. And I remember I was walking my dog, and I was walking, to cross the street here, and trucking along, and this guy with his dog cuts right in front of me and like gets right in and walks really super like in my way. And I was like, all of a sudden, that snap thing happened with me too. And I felt this rage feeling. I'm like, I'm going to cut him. Like, how dare he who does he think he is? And I was like, in this moment. And I'm like, I think that's what he talked about in this book. It's just like shortcut right into it. And
Yeah.
I just want to like pull this guy's head off.
That's right. That's right.
We're just walking in front of me.
Exactly. So I just played Dan Siegel's video last week at class.
You did?
And there's a YouTube video out there with Dan, and he explains about it's called flipping our lid. Okay. And it's on the prefrontal cortex and then the midbrain and the brainstem. And when we flip our lid, it's really hard for us to bring ourselves back online because our prefrontal cortex is gone. Like our main thing is survival in that moment.
Mm-hmm.
And the faster or quicker we can bring this back online allows us to get back in our rational brain and kind of regulate our emotions and regulate our responses. But like for me, right, my main goal with therapy is how do I work with this part in here so that you do this less? If you do it, you can get this back online faster. You know what I mean? It takes more to dysregulate you.
Gosh, it's so funny because I hope you don't mind me, like, because now as we're getting into it, I'm like seeing all these like things. So even today in like social media with everything that's going on in the world, I will run across a post. It'll be like a link to something, or it'll be a comment about something about the news, and all of a sudden I will find myself in that lid flips off again, and I'm like in this like in my mental space where I'm just like in this like I'm angry and I'm starting to feel this stuff, and I'm like whoa, bring it back,
Yeah, I would say, as a therapist at these interesting times right now, uh, there was a lot of processing being done in the office around the election, and the easiest clinical summary I could give you is around a lot of powerless and helplessness.
Yeah.
Around a lot of powerless and helplessness.
Yeah.
Is a big theme that has been coming up. And once again, if there's any core memories or highly emotive events around powerless and helplessness back in the past, right? Coming from a family, being bullied because you're gay and not feeling like you have a choice to get out of it, like all those things, right, that can also elicit powerless and helplessness can trigger the same stuff. Just reading a news article.
Yeah.
Just reading a news article and feeling powerless and helpless towards that news article can trigger trauma responses from your past, right?
Yep. And it's interesting. It's like this when it comes to like these masculine figures that are in power, and they're kind of I'm interpreting it as they're using it against me, or they're trying to just like cut, it's almost like the same thing, that guy cutting in front of me. It's like they're trying to get ahead and they're trying to take over and use their power to circumvent me and take away my power. And I forgot my train of thought now, but yeah,
No,
come back to me.
I'll just add on, to what you said right there. I think just some of those behaviors lead to the individual, or, the disenfranchised individual of whatever policies are being done, at feeling invalidated.
Yeah.
And every human being has a desire to be seen, a desire to be heard, right? And so when you have things that are happening that are causing you to feel invalidated or not seen, those are
Yeah.
trauma triggers to other times in your life where you felt not seen or not heard, right? And so if your default coping mechanism was like, I'm not seen or heard, and now I'm going to stand up for myself, right? Anger or, curtness, that stuff will happen automatically.
Yeah. It really makes a lot of sense. Now, it's so funny because I'm learning it as we're talking
Yeah,
now,
that's
even though
right.
I knew a lot of different principles and things like that.
Yeah.
Because I would, on the flip side of that too, I would, if say I would go through an episode like that where I would have this internal, no one knows what's going on in my head, but I
Right.
feel all these things, movie is going on in my head where I am evening that score.
Yeah.
You are not going to do that to me. And I'm sure there are lots of people that are doing that. And then as I'm going through, I'm like, oh my God, what are you thinking? Stop that. I'm like, and I still feel a little bit ashamed because I'm like, I'm a nice person. How can I be like this? And I like, oh my God, if people knew that I thought that.
Yeah. Exactly. Well, you bring up a really good point. And this is, I keep referencing, authors and things, people in the field, but Bessel van der Kolk, wrote the book, The Body Keeps the Score.
Oh,
Um,
yeah.
and he is one of he's the leading trauma expert and researcher, and that's basically what he did. Was we had all these theories and ideas around trauma, from World War I and World War II, and people coming back and knowing that something changed, right? Something got rewired in the brain. And we had just had theories, up until when Bessel started doing his research out at Harvard. And I think it's the mid 90s. Don't quote me on that, but I think it's in the mid 90s. But they basically were being able to use fMRI machines and having people read exactly what you said, reading like scripts of things that were done to them or about them, just reading it. And they were able to prove that just even thinking it or reading it was firing up the brain as if they were really going through it.
Wow. Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
fascinating.
And it's back. I think you talked about that movie screen or
Uh-huh.
the,
That's
it's
right.
like that's what's happening. There's like something that's being cast, I guess you would say
Exactly.
cast in mind or whatever.
Yep.
Yeah. Because I find myself going back to a lot of it does go back to seventh grade because I went through a hellish period, as a seventh grader. I mean, I had moved, single. My parents had divorced earlier, like when I was 7. But in seventh grade, my mom and she was a school teacher. We moved to a wealthy suburb in the western suburbs, and clearly, we didn't, fit in that community. We were in like the poor part, I guess, and going to school with all these rich kids. But then at the same time, me coming into feeling attractions toward other boys. And then, the year or two prior, I was sexually abused by a relative. So I had all these different things that were like in me by the time I got to that place.
Yep.
And then to start to experience the rejection. And that was the first time that year that I was introduced to the word gay. I didn't know what it was. And all I know is that it must have been bad because all the kids were pointing at me and jeering at me. And they were so cruel. But that entire year I went through it. It was like I had it. So I was, Catholic. And so it was junior high, so Monday through Friday. And then I had to go to this thing called CCD on Saturdays. And
Yep.
so I got it there too. Different kids,
Oh,
not even the same town. Different
yeah.
kids were doing it to me too. So I had like 6 days a week. I had to deal with this like abuse from kids.
Yeah.
And I only had one day off, which was Sunday. And it
Wow.
was like went on for an entire year. It was just horrible. And
Mm.
then when I had gotten away from it and got into high school, um, some of it started to surface like toward my senior year. And I'm like, no, I'm never going to go through that again. And I thought about suicide because I'm like, I don't want to go through this. As a little kid, as a teen, in that preteen, teen, I guess yeah, I guess I would have been a teenager by high school. Um, had to relive the kids doing that to me. I'm like, no, I am not. I cross the line, So it just, and I can see like even in today with like revisiting another 4-year term
Uh,
of what we went through before, that could probably trigger something that people would think despairing thought, or like you said, the helplessness or the need for things like that. So
100%. 100%. One of the things, well, first off, I can't even imagine, what that must have been like to go through that 6 days a week and not have a break.
it was seriously, yeah, it was awful. It was pretty awful. And I know that there are people who have gone through like I can't compare it. We're all go through everything's you can't
This
really
is,
like say this is a better grade of it. This is a worse grade of it, whatever.
no, 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 no. You had a highly emotive experience
Yeah.
that lasted for a really, really long time.
Hmm.
And so that changes you.
Yeah.
Right? That changes you. You
Yeah.
know, can I make a connection? Are you okay if I make a
Go
connection?
for it. Yeah.
Like, so you were talking about going to that party where you said that like there was a part of you that was telling a story or narrative around like that they didn't want you or you weren't being able to connect with them and stuff like that. And so my curiosity would be, I'm wondering if that internal voice connects at some level to a coping mechanism or how you were trying to protect yourself back in seventh grade,
Yeah.
if that
There
makes sense.
is in that period, and I talk about this in one of my earlier videos on the YouTube channel, but um one class in particular in 7th grade, it was math class. And I remember it was second period. I remember the room. I know what it looked like. And I remember the teacher, so you have all the desks. Typically the desks face forward to the chalkboard or to the teacher's desk or whatever. But this teacher, he decided that he was going to have like a row in the middle where he can, so he half the class, the chairs faced toward each other. So
Yeah.
half the
Yeah.
class faced each other. You know what I'm saying? Then the middle row was he could walk through it and that kind of thing. So as I'm looking at, so I have to look at kids across the way. I can't like look straight forward and not have to like look at,
Yes.
the teacher. I had to look at kids. And what I was seeing was all the gestures, the sniggering, the laughter, the pointing. I mean, anytime like I had the teacher, I remember the teacher having to introduce like, calling me or something like that, and I would hear it every time that he called David. Like I'd hear the kids on the other side making the faces. I remember when there was a new kid that moved into who's new in school, and was the teacher was like, I'm going to say something about everybody. I'm going to introduce everybody. And then he like says, I don't know anything about David. And everyone's like, oh yeah, we know about David, and it's like, it was
Oh.
like the worst, like, and so that memory, I feel like you going into that party,
Uh-huh.
that's where,
But that
because I remember when kids are looking at you,
that's right.
there's
That's
nowhere I could hide because they
that's
could see if I'm crying. And I literally would have my head down and the tears would be coming down and I was like snot coming out of me and stuff like that. There's nowhere to go. And so that room where everybody's
yep.
looking at me like kids,
Yep.
yeah, 100%.
And now as an adult, there's a place to go. You could just walk right out, right?
Right? I'm like, bye, Irish goodbye.
But that's also why that's the default. Like that was a default setting for you because
Yeah.
it was easier because the younger version of you was forced to sit there and
Yes.
endure that.
Hmm.
And I can't even imagine that, right? Sitting at that desk and looking out, and then almost like your nervous system's almost on hyper arousal.
Hmm.
You know what I mean? Hyper vigilant, watching. That's not how a seventh grader's nervous system is supposed to be keyed up when they're sitting there in a class in seventh grade, right?
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that as a judgment call. I'm saying that as like in a safe,
Hmm.
non-bullied environment, a seventh grader should be able to sit there and just relaxed and like they're ready to learn. And then that's why oftentimes in school systems, people are like, well, what's wrong? And I don't know what your grades were or anything like that, but they'll be like, oh, like, what's wrong with David's grades? Like, well, David's nervous system is so keyed up during that class that he can't even have the ability to access learning or even have the ability to be present to learn because
Mhm.
constantly having to think about, is he going to make it out of there, or what's going to how are they going to make him the target today?
Right. And that
Hmm.
prefrontal,
Mhm.
that in that moment, it's like it's down, right?
Yeah,
Because that middle part or whatever, the mid range.
yeah,
I actually have a newsletter, and I talked about this last week in my newsletter. No, actually the week before, and it was in regards to reading all the social media posts and all this, and how I was mildly upset that there was so much feeding it, that there was so
yeah,
much out there. It was just making the problem worse because everyone's getting all jacked up. And I said, I will come across this, and all of a sudden I'm upset. And I said, all of a sudden I'm frozen. I can't do anything. I feel like my whole body feels rigid. I feel like I can hardly breathe. I'm shallow breathing. Everything's collapsing in. And I said, you're, and I couldn't describe the, said, and have the prefrontal cortex lingual in my head when I was writing. I said it's something to do with the executive function, but I don't quote me on that. And then the
well,
lizard brain.
well, it's about our survival, right? It's like, how do I
Yeah,
get in here? Am I safe? Am I
right.
protected? All those things are trigger.
No, that's okay.
In training, supervising therapists and then also working with clients, my advice for what's going on right now is, obviously there's a part of us that needs to be informed. It's really important that we're informed. Um, but if it gets us to the point where we're so informed and it makes us feel so powerless and so helpless that we shut down, then we have to be able to jump back and forth between being informed and then also how do we have agency over the things that we do have agency over, right? Because if we're over here and 100% of my brain power is just reading and absorbing things that I'm powerless and helpless over, it's going to put me in a state of hypoarousal. I'm going to be shut down or
Yes.
dysregulated and pissed off, right?
Right, right.
If I can find a balance between, okay, locus of control, things I'm in control over that I have control over, or things I don't have control over. And if I can sit there and, obviously I'm going to read some news because I want to be informed, but then how am I going to be able to be engaged in the community? I'll share a personal example this week is like I had a huge training Thursday through Sunday. It was all day, 9 hours each day for 4 days.
Mhm.
And we ended up just having uh, on our calendar the Equality Illinois Gala.
Mhm.
And we went to the Equality Illinois Gala on Saturday night, and it was about, the legal arm of this whole situation that's going on, and the legal arm that's going to protect certain protected groups or work to protect groups. And what I realized walking away from there, and I told my husband, I said, wow, I really needed to be engaged in a community event in which I felt empowered. You know, there's so much disempowerment going on right now that I
Yes.
needed that. But right, like even me as a therapist, like a little disconnected in the
Right,
sense that I didn't even know how much I needed that, until
right.
I was there. I walked away and was like,
Hmm.
wow. So my advice to myself is find more events like that I
Yeah.
can be engaged in.
Yeah.
Don't just be so disengaged in the stuff I can't control. Find the things that I can. If they're going to disenfranchise a protected group, I'm going to go talk to a group. I'm going to go talk to someone, let them know that they matter, that they're valid, that they're always going to be valid to me. Now, I'm not going to invalidate their experience of feeling minimized
Right.
and invalidated, but I'm also going to connect and use community as a way to try and validate somebody to the best of my ability that I can.
Um, can we talk a little bit about community? Because I feel this is such an important topic as well. And I've had to work through, well, obviously, you've heard a little bit about the seventh grade trauma. Coming out, I came out when I was 40. I religious background, lots of years trying to change. came out late, come into the neighborhood, trying to get to meet everybody and try to figure it all out. The one thing that was that I've learned to kind of really work I have a little bit of skill, so I can kind of work through different things and just, some people can't. Some people don't have the ability to navigate really tricky things, but I've learned to kind of figure certain things out. But the thing that was really hard for me to get around was how mean people could be, how cliquey, and how separate, I want to say it, how I guess segregated in a way, like the groups that needed to have an identity among themselves, I would say, have a sense of, I guess, security to have a group that would kind of buttress them against anything that would come at them. And mainly because there's so much of this, I don't know if it's a sense of like there's not enough to go around, you're gonna get what I have, you think you're better than me. There's all these different like dynamics that are going on. I probably go back to some of these other things that we were talking about, seventh grade type things or whatever.
100%.
So when you have all of that going on, and I can't find a man. Everyone's like playing games, all the different like scripts that go on, that when they really need is to have that sense where they are feeling protected and they're protecting each other. So they're in a place where they need to like cover each other's back, and they need to have that place. But if you're like, you're brought again to like your team sport experience, my high school, my seventh grade math experience, where I am singled out, I have nowhere to go, I have to hide, I can't be myself, I have to be full of shame. And then everyone's separate, but everyone needs to have a sense of being connected with one another because the world is coming at us. You need to have that.
Yeah.
I think now with all the triggers and all the things that are coming at, this is so important. So how can we, or have you thought about it, how can we do the things like where we need to like take care of ourselves, but also kind of like figure out a way to draw toward each other where it's not like you want something from me.
Yeah.
You're gonna steal my man. You're gonna like think you're better than me. You're gonna take my job. You're gonna take my place in the pecking order of this whole social system that we're in. Because this stuff goes on. It's crazy.
Of course. Of course. You're catching me off guard with this one.
Oh no.
No, you're totally fine. But I think for me, it's been like find my tribe.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And it's been kind of like a trial and error.
Yeah.
Trial and error has not always been linear, and that trial and error has not always been the cleanest, you know what I mean? And that goes from like even in my recovery community, that like I could go to one meeting and there's those people. If I go to another meeting, these are like within straight groups, right? Or predominantly straight groups. And like for me, right, like it's just I always will just keep trying to find my people and people that just resonate with me. And what I mean by that is like, I try to the best of my ability lead with like compassion and curiosity and understanding. And so finding other people that kind of like try to live that same way. You know what I mean?
I do. I think that's
yeah. And then I don't know, I'm just trying to think of the different, there's so many different little like little sub communities I'm a part of. I tried pottery for 6 months and met people there. I'm in a swim class right now. I met people there. Like, so it's just like, it's just kind of there. And they're just, like,
I think
and
that's great.
yeah.
I want to make an observation because I that is where I've that's where I've come to. And I think that's how I've actually been able to make it through different things. But I think it's gotten more as I've come along the journey more and I've healed more. I've been able to be more adept at it, and I'm able to kind of, I've gone through this a lot with my therapist. Is having there's been this like major transitions and major like I don't know how to say it like things that have like accelerated in me as I've started to work through different things where I feel like more whole, and I feel more like I'm able to be seen like in ways I haven't been seen before.
That's
Not like I wasn't always there, but there was something about me where I felt more myself and more like I could present myself to everybody else, that they could actually see who I really was. And I didn't have to pretend. And I didn't have to, like things like I look at, myself, I didn't have to act up. I didn't have to get attention. I didn't have to like, I'd never been a bitchy person, but like I didn't have to be a bitchy person. I had to be the sarcastic person. I don't have to be the person who always has to joke all the time. I could
yeah.
just be my full on, authentic, grounded self. And I was able to kind of move in. But I know initially when I came out, there's to be able to, like what you're doing, you go to pottery, you go to the swimming, you go to this thing, you kind of, you're piecing together what you
Right.
need. Some people, and I know maybe I had gone through a stage where I felt like it has to be this. I have to have this in the gay community. Gay people are the only people I can be with. This is all I can be with.
Yeah, but I'm going to take you right back to trauma 101, right? A main core trauma for a lot of LGBT individuals is not belonging, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so what can happen is a part of them puts an overemphasis on belonging to this ideal or what they think this ideal is, or you know what I mean? And
Mm-hmm.
trying to force a square peg in a round hole as like not realizing like that might not be for you. You know, there might
Yeah.
be something else for you. You know, I joined the CMSA sports leagues, you know what I mean? And like tried that out a little bit. Volleyball wasn't really for me. So I'm gonna go try something else, you know what I mean? And so it's like
Yeah.
for me, it's trying to keep that malleable, flexible mindset. Like,
Yes.
this isn't working. How do I not, it's okay to personalize it, but how do I kind of depersonalize it a little bit and go
Mm-hmm.
find something else? You know what I mean?
Yes. Yes.
I had
100%.
my party phases and going out phases and stuff like that. And it's great for people who want to go out or do whatever. But just for me, like that wasn't, I function in a different circle or in a different connection in a different way. And that's just for me, right? That's my personal thing. And that's what I spend time doing a lot of time with clients, helping them find, where is your community, right?
Yeah.
We live in such an amazing city in Chicago where
Yeah.
there are so many communities and so many opportunities and so many different, I mean, there's something here for somebody. You know what I mean?
There
It's
is. Yeah.
how do you make it almost like a treasure hunt to find that?
That's a great metaphor. That's a treasure hunt, to have an adventure, something
Yeah,
where it doesn't have to be an all or nothing black or white thing where you can just like go and try to discover kind of what's out there. And it doesn't have to be in this particular neighborhood. You can just hop over a couple of neighborhoods away. You
that's
can
right.
find it over in this little thing, and I feel that's really good. And because those are skills. Those are skills and mindsets that people can take up. And because I know also kind of what happens if you stay in the same types of groups, and especially when you say they're maybe not even really your group, but you feel like you have to, or this is what you should aspire to, and you're going to have to stay in this, and you might be miserable about it, but this is the group, this is what I have to be, this is how it defines me, and then it creates other kinds of maybe issues, or maybe you're going to have, I would assume, maybe just more judgment on yourself, more shame, all kinds of spiraling things, anger, it's going to
Exactly.
replicate probably.
Yeah.
Like even like stuff I've been curious too, now that we're talking about it, even stuff like, I've always just wondered about even, there's the different cultures, there's the bear culture, there's the otter culture, there's the twink culture, there's all these different things. And I've always been like, well, if I like the person, I like the person. Why do I have to have a type? And I feel like that getting stuck in something, and I'm like, and I was always thinking like, I think that bear guy kind of thinks I'm hot, but he doesn't want to admit it because he's got to like the other bears. I had these little conversations in my head,
Right, right, right. Well, I like to call it the flexible mindset. And
Yeah.
I I just know with myself, attractions to different people have changed. My types have changed throughout the years. I'm 47 years old. It's like totally changed. Even sexual preferences and things I like has changed. And I think it's like when you allow your own like internal judge and critic to relax back a little bit, you can open yourself up to new experiences or new ideas. And I always say, like, you can try anything, right? And then after you try it, say, like, oh, like, how did I feel about that? Did that work for me? Right. But I think to your point, right, we default to what is this thing I'm trying to aspire to be part of for protection? And it's all about that at all costs.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not working.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
You know, because we talked a little bit, you know, however, like last month when we were kind of thinking about like, you know, having this, you know, discussion or whatever. And, you know, we talked about the different modalities and, you know, I'm gonna get it right, EMDR, was it eye movement desensitization,
Reprocessing.
reprocessing? Okay, got it. Don't quiz me on it later. I'll probably want to go back to dancing, but one of the things that, you know, we talk about like things changing your brain or whatever. I would do different things over the last. I've had just a huge growth like curve, I guess I would say, over the last maybe 5, 6, 7 years or so. And there are things that I did, and I wondered if they were like perhaps had remapped something or had fixed something or whatever.
Right.
You know, the one year that I had, a friend of mine had taken his life, and I decided I was going to do dinner parties at my house, and I was going to invite people over. That was a big like risk for me because I felt like, you know, my place is small. Because I had the judgments on myself. I'm like,
Yeah, 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 yeah.
no gay guy would ever approve of my place because I don't have anything on the walls. Don't have the right kind of dishes. You know, I had all these like preconceived things, and you know, everyone knows a gay guy comes in there. It's like queer eye for the straight guy. They're gonna criticize everything. Oh my God, I can't have them here in this space. So I had to like kind of work through that, and I would invite different people. And I remember there was at the gym, there's this couple, and one guy, well, you know, like you probably know like Matt and Chris. So you probably know Chris. Well, I think you know those guys. But anyhow, Matt's this big imposing guy, and I go and he's got a stern face all the time. And I remember stuttering a little bit when I asked. I say, would you like to come over? You know, I'm having some people over. Would you be interested? You know, he goes, sure. You know, but doing something like that, like, and I kept doing that over like 12 months. I would invite these people who had never ever, and I had to like put myself out there, make myself vulnerable, and it kind of developed like some kind of like strength in me to be able to invite people in and then have them over. And I had talk about pushing yourself. Like I made stuff that I'd never made before, like dishes. I mean, like desserts. I mean, I'm not even a dessert maker. I'm like, oh my God, this is going to be like, what if I poison them? You know, I'm like, you know, there's all these like things
Amazing.
going on. But it was so transformative. Like that whole year gave me all this like richness that came out of it. The next time I had done for 1 year, I committed to doing these video interview and that video I would send people. I might have sent you one. I can't remember if I sent you one. I would send people a video message on their birthday, and I would record it, and I would send it to them. And whoever fell on that day, I would send them a video message. And there are people that I knew from way back when, and there are people that I didn't really know very well, and I would just do it. And it was kind of somewhat scary, and I felt like a little like awkward about it. And but the more that I did it, it was like another thing where I felt like I developed something and I kept doing this. And now when I'm doing these podcast things and these YouTube things and I'm going out there and do this, every time I have to do this stuff and I've been exposing myself to these new like stimulation things where I'm like, you know, like we were talking about like when you went to that gala or you had all those things that were going on and you just wanted to feel like you were okay and the people at the gala were saying, you know, the legal arm, whatever it was you were saying. Pushing myself in all these different ways like has it's initially, like if I would never been able to do this like 5 years ago, I would have fallen over. I could only do one thing at a time. Now I'm like going in and out, in and out, in and out. And I
Uh-huh.
feel in my body like a little bit like if I get really tired, like a little bit tired today. But I remember getting ready for this us to talk, and I felt like a little bit like a little anxious, because you're trying to, this is a new thing happening again. We're getting ready for a new thing. How's it going to go? I don't know. Will this technology work? I mean, and I'm going to sound stupid, all that stuff. But I think each time I did it, like over the
That's
course
right.
of the last 5 years, it's been like this thing where
Exactly.
now I feel like I go in and out and I'm like much more adept at like
Yes.
whatever's processing my brain.
Yeah. So can I use that as an example?
Sure.
So what I like to call is like you're having a corrective experience.
Oh, okay.
What's happening is like I'm gonna keep for our purposes here, I'm gonna keep using the seventh grade experience, right? If on the nervous system, socially, it got you to a point where you have different parts of you that shut down or kind of block you to prevent you from putting yourself out there, right? Because the nervous system's like recognizes putting yourself out there as a threat because when it tried to back then, moving to a new place, like that was just not good, right? And so if you've got these parts of you that are almost blocking you to kind of like not put yourself out there for protective purposes, right?
Mhm.
You'll stay on that default loop
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
unless you intentionally go and process it with like an EMDR IFS, or you have a corrective experience. And what you did was you almost did like exposure therapy in the
Mm-hmm.
sense that you challenge yourself to have a corrective experience. So it's like having those people over for the dinners, right? Going up to the person and inviting them over. Like you were basically having a corrective experience with a shut down part of you to let
Mm-hmm.
it know, like, hey, guess what? Like you can actually soften up a little bit and let me put myself out there. And I actually was okay.
Yeah.
I was
Yeah.
actually safe. And I actually got a couple close friends from doing that.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe I don't have to have you shut down so much. You know,
Ah,
having a corrective experience with that part of you. You know what I'm
yeah.
saying? I'm just using that as an example,
No,
but
it makes light bulbs going off in my head
no,
now.
well, you're rewiring the brain. You're like it's called neuroplasticity, and
Ah,
basically those pathways, because you're trying something new, are being carved, and now you've got this new skill, right? It's that flexible mindset.
I never made that connection.
Well,
That's so,
I think it's beautiful.
you know, um, I want to share this, and I'm not sure. I don't want to embarrass him or whatever, but when I had interviewed Mark for that podcast,
Mhm.
it was like one of those things that there was like this something about when my therapist talks about the contingent communication where you pass something, information is received, it comes back this way versus being blocked or whatever. And in real time, as I was doing that, because I had all these things going on in my head, and I'm like doing this thing, and as I'm doing this interview and talking, I was experiencing in real time this communication that was going on. And it was like an interesting experience because I had never in real time, I was someone who I just knew from the gym, and I just knew at a certain level. And all of a sudden I'm like we're exchanging information and I'm getting to know him at a different level. And all of a sudden I'm like, there's this passing back and forth of information that all of a sudden I'm like, this is something that I'm learning right now. And there's something that's happening inside my brain. And
Yep.
it was like a it caused in me, and I don't, it caused this big shift in my mind. Like there was something that happened that all of a sudden I had this one identity that all of a sudden just got adjusted and it has not moved back. I mean, it's like I have like carried myself, and it wasn't like anything that I want to make it clear. It wasn't like he bequeathed something on me. You know what I'm saying? It wasn't
Oh, that's
that.
right.
It was
That's
like
right.
something that I received and believed about myself that all of a sudden got locked in, and I was like in a different mental space. And all of a sudden I'm like, here I am. I'm in this place, and this is confirmation of all these other things I've already worked really hard
Exactly.
in my life. All those
Yes.
video messages, the birthday messages I left for people, the dinner parties that I did, the podcast things I did over here, all that.
Put
I
you
think all
right
that,
here. It
yeah.
puts you right here to do this.
Yeah.
And that's I think when we can get to I call it I call it our true self. When
hmm
we're in our true self, right, separate of all these parts of ourselves, right, these protective parts. When we're in our true self and it's expansive, right? That's like when we're at our highest self, when we can hold compassion to anyone, even people
Yes.
we don't like, or
hmm
we can hold true curiosity and understanding to like someone's story, right?
hmm
It allows us to hold that same energy towards ourself, right?
hmm
And when we can hold that energy towards ourself, like you said, like what I hear you saying is like you're able to look at like the beads on the pearl necklace that actually make up the whole strand, right? Like, oh, if I didn't do those video messages,
hmm
I wouldn't have built up XY skill to be here. If I didn't have, you know what I mean? And like everything's meant to be a reason. That's why I like laugh because sometimes I'll look and be like, oh, I'm a clarinet performance, undergrad, what do I do with that? But there's this level of creativity that I use in therapy through analogy or expression. And
Yeah.
I know that's a direct result of that talent that I had in music somewhere. And so without that, I wouldn't be the therapist that I am, or without the business side, I wouldn't be. So it's kind of cool when we can get to that state of like
Yeah.
seeing the big picture and how even the struggles, right? I wouldn't take away any of those struggles I've had because
hmm
they led me to exactly where I'm at right now.
Yes. When you said that about compassion and being able to hold, I guess I would say also hold space for things. It's interesting because since I got into that whatever that thing is that happened with me,
Yeah.
I have like found myself like there's something about the way that I am interacting with people like everywhere. Like I feel like
Mhm.
I really ask them how they are. Like, how are you doing? I'm like, really, there's something that I'm like you said, the curiosity. There's something that's like all of a sudden got freed. It doesn't, oh, what? I might take this part out of my video, but it hasn't happened with mom because my mom drives me crazy.
So, no. So yeah. That's right. That's Oh, that's right. Okay. I tell clients, right? Like at the end of the day, if I go home to my mom and dad, I love them to death. They're amazing, but it still doesn't mean that they don't trigger my child parts, right? Because there's systems and patterns in that are just so grooved, right? There's a
Mhm.
pathway that's grooved in here that's so long, and it's like, so yes, of course, that makes total sense to me that if you get around mom, it's like, oh, that comes back there. But
Ah.
with her, you're able to hold that space
Mhm.
for other people.
Yeah, it hasn't happened with my mom yet. Well, no, I can't. I had to take that out of the video because sometimes she watches these.
No, you can leave that in there. It's fine. You should see my parents, okay? They're the parents of a trauma therapist, okay? They love to, like, oh, you tell everybody about your trauma. Like
Right. This
parents like to
conversation
personalize. Parents like to personalize.
do. They do. Oh, yeah, I could just go on for more things, but I am not like my mom sends me through things and I'm like, you know, I we probably heard this pop culture, this book that's gone around, the let them theory. Have you heard of that one yet? The book. It's like that part that I'm just like, well, I'm just gonna do whatever. I'm not gonna like, let her be the way she is.
Yeah. Well, that's the compassion part, right? Like
Yeah.
I know that if I can get myself in a state where I can look at something like that and I see what's really happening there. I can see their trauma. I can
Yeah.
see what's going on there, and I can look at the bigger picture even for them.
Yeah.
It really, really helps to ground me.
100%. This has been such a wonderful conversation, and maybe we can. I think that everything that we've talked about um, really comes down through different childhood experiences, the things that take place in the brain, the events that happen. It all kind of really ties in what we really, really long for is that sense, like you said, like of connection and a place and belonging. And in terms of just what people really want in, as gay men, what they want in the community, what they want from each other is to really have like these good positive experiences
Yeah.
where they can actually see one another and really, and again, get to a place where they can hold space where say, hey, yeah, no, I know you're messed up. These things are happening. We're not everybody's there, but like to be able to get to that place where you're maybe practicing some of these things, like you said, you're going to the pottery, you're going to go to the swimming, I'm going to do, birthday video messages, I'm going to invite people over for dinner, I'm going to keep kind of retraining this thing. I think that is a way to get to somewhere. I'm curious, I'm just doing a little bit of research here, but like, is that a type of resilience? Is that like a type of like to be able to like do things like this, activities or whatever? Is that a type of way of becoming a more resilient person, like
I would
emotionally
say
resilient?
I would say for sure,
Okay.
because when you're putting yourself out there and trying new things, you're working those muscles. You're building that resilient muscle. To me, right? Like, can I just speak on resilience for a second?
Please, yes.
Like resilience to me, right? Like we come from such a hyper masculine, uh, you know, dominant driven society. And sometimes people like resilience has kind of gotten this, bastardized term where it's like, oh, just like keep moving on, keep moving on. And that's not what I think resilience is. Resilience is doing exactly what you've done. You know what I mean? Where you do the video messages, you take yourself and you require a new skill or push yourself past that comfort zone. And so to
Mm,
me, resilience, like, yeah, resilience is going through a challenge and a struggle, but then it's also how are you having that corrective experience with yourself so that when the struggle happens again, you handle it differently.
yes,
I
yes.
mean, and to me, that's the resilience, right? Is we keep moving on, but every time something comes back to us, we handle it differently the next time.
Yes. It's
More
not a
skills, more resources. Yeah, exactly. That's right.
not a Groundhog Day.
It's not a Groundhog Day.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, being able to like, yeah, no, that's good.
Yeah, I think anytime you put yourself out there, the human system is so interesting to me because we crave we crave routine. We
Hmm.
crave consistency. We crave regularity. But yet, there's another part of us that hates it, that gets
Hmm.
into a rut, that gets into the monotony. You know what I mean? And so for me, it's always like a blend of like, how am I creating that security and consistency and safety? But then how am I pushing myself out and challenging and changing things up or,
Hmm.
causing my system to have to kind of adapt to the changes? And there's a balance there.
Yeah, there is. Yeah. And it's so what's interesting to me, I've always been kind of in love reading about like how to change different things. I'm interested in like self-development type things and books and things like that. But I know that there are people who are very against it. They're kind of like mock it a little bit, like there's like something that's not cool about it, and like, oh, that what is that like voodoo stuff or whatever they want to like make fun of it. But there's that, or they don't want to change, or they don't, what, take a class? I want somebody to pay me to take that class. I'm not going to take that class for myself. I don't want to learn those things, but I want to have a raise.
Yeah,
All that
exactly.
stuff. They're against it.
Exactly.
I don't know. I don't know what that's about, but
Yeah.
That is another thing that I don't know if it's a pride thing that I had to that macho or whatever. I could figure it out on my own. I don't need to that's too feminine or whatever. I can't like learn
Yeah.
that stuff. I should, yeah,
It's
nice.
interesting.
How can any other closing thoughts or
Nothing.
anything
I'm
that you
just,
wanted to cover that we didn't cover or anything you want everyone to know?
no, I guess I just want to end on this. Like, this my stance is this, right? It's not that talk therapy doesn't work. That's not at all what I'm trying to say or saying. It's actually really beneficial for a lot of people.
Mhm.
What I'm trying to get at with when we kind of talked about this is, you know, and does somebody having triggers on their nervous system, is it mean there's something wrong with them? No. Are there plenty of people that have that and are high functioning and going on about life? Yes. And do they need to go do EMDR therapy? No. It's just, does somebody find that there's stuff going on that maybe, has always been going on, and they don't feel like they feel like they're stuck and they don't know why they can't change it? Is really just to educate and inform people that there are ways and things out there that can help people and get support.
For sure. How can people learn more about either you or the therapy, or is there any other resources that you would recommend?
The Body Keeps the Score is my favorite book. It's an amazing book. I have my graduate students read it. It's any lay person can read it. It's a little sciencey, so you got to be kind of a little bit nerdy, but it's an awesome book. Um, if you want to like learn more about me, luminarysolutions.org. And there's actually a little video about EMDR on there if somebody wants to, watch a video and kind of understand a little bit what that's all about.
Excellent.
Yeah. Thank you
Thank,
so much for having me.
thank you for being willing to share your journey and all the. It's been a good conversation for sure.
Grateful.
Yeah.